90-something% of those who come in at the beginning are there at the end. Now, how is that fair to then compare that school with a school which has enormous turbulence or churn, as we call it? It is patently unfair. And yet, through the league tables, that is exactly what we do.
That makes the league tables completely unfair.
Well, so we all agree league tables are unfair on this panel today. I don't know how much in the audience we agree with that, but that leads me nicely to my next question. Despite everybody saying get rid of the league tables, this question is very pertinent because we can't hide from the league tables. So, Dean Narayn-Lee, where are you?
Hello, I'm the one with the mic.
Oh, you're looking, that's where the mic is. You've been looking for it. Would you like to ask your question?
Academies are purported to be the vanguard of excellence. As most secondary schools in Bradford are now academies, why is Bradford still second bottom in the league tables?
Gosh, how many hours have we got? First of all, I might sit on the Education Select Committee. We just recently produced a report which Ms. Karen obviously has not read, because what it says is that the jury is out on academies. And I voted against the Academies bill. I opposed Academies under last one, and I opposed them under this government, for very much the same reasons. That I believe that the focus on structure, it is quality leadership, it is quality management, it's quality teaching, quality learning taking place within schools, and that can occur and does occur in all sorts of different schools, and that's what we're really. So it's been a distraction, I believe. Why is Bradford, even though there was an increase in academies? So that's what the Education Select Committee actually came out with. Its evidence was that the jury is out. There's good and bad in different structures within the school setting. Why Bradford? This is a big subject, but the gist of it is this: look, we do have the trouble when you start talking about the problems that Bradford faces in its schools. It sounds like you're making excuses, and we must not make excuses. These are reasons why, if you are a teacher in many schools in Bradford, it is just tougher than being in certain other areas, and some of those I've already referred to. With the new arrivals to the system in terms of language, in terms of the socio-economic, in two of my wards, it's the highest child poverty in the Yorkshire Humberside region, 44 and 45%. Only 1 in 2 children are from families in child poverty. Now again, that has an impact, because if you look at all of the contributory factors between attainment and something else, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's to do with race, whether it's to do with gender, whether it's to do with religion, the thing that links the attainment more than anything else to whether someone does well or not is the level of social deprivation. And so we have to recognise that. We have to be good at doing that. The other thing that I was saying is that being a head teacher is difficult at the best of times. Being an outstanding head teacher is very, very difficult to do. And we've got 200 odd schools, and there are many, many areas of the country where you do not need, quite frankly, to have outstanding head teachers for the attainment, and remember what I said about achievement, but attainment to look good. There will be coasting schools, and that needs to be dealt with. But it will still be above us in the league table simply because of the socio-economic situation of that particular district. What we do need is we haven't actually got the capacity. I don't really believe within Bradford we have the capacity to ourselves raise the level of achievement. There aren't enough really of those at an outstanding level to do that. So that means we need outside help to do that. We can't do it. We'd love to do it, but I don't think we have that capacity to do it ourselves.
Maybe you run a successful school that's been successful for 10 years. From an outside perspective, I think before I ask the rest of the panel, being from Huddersfield, what do you think about Bradford being second in the league tables?
I think I agree with some of the points made, and you have to look at the contextual data on Bradford as well. I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer this one very well. I don't agree with league tables, and they don't take everything into account. Bradford's tried really, really hard over the past, I think. Now, the question was about academies. It wasn't about Bradford, I think it was about academies, because we've been told by this government that if you have academies, the standards will go up. That's what they tell us, don't they? Because if a school fails, what do? They do enforce academization. So if you look at that logic, academies are what is going to raise standards. And in Bradford, if you have that many schools that have become forced academies, then really why are the standards going up? And I can't answer that question. But then we have to look at the logic behind what the government's telling us, that academies are the best. So I ask you, as Bradford people, is that really what's best for you to know?
The problem with the drive to create academies under this government is it created an atmosphere of fear, uncertainty, bribery, and almost downright corruption. What we saw just down the road at Keen Science Academy was the opening of a school led by someone who got no experience in management, with financial arrangements that would make John Paulson look like a vicar, and a situation where children's education is being experimented with. What we needed at this time, and I accept Bradford has a huge journey to go, but I don't accept all of what David says. It isn't just poverty. There are schools in this city that have outperformed every poverty indicator you could lay at them, right? And the question is why? And some of the key things that we need to look at are about parenting, attachment, and the early experience, investing in the early years, and to have ambition and inspiration. And there are schools that are doing that in Bradford and elsewhere. But I do agree with David that we have to recognise that we need, in whatever model of challenge or support we develop for Bradford, which we are doing, we reach out to people like yourself and others. I visited a school in Halifax that's got 7 outstanding, I knew the head from when I worked in the family court, 7 outstanding judgments in the Parkinson Lane area of Halifax, which is a fairly deprived area, but with strong links to this area. How come Goodsey Ardman can get 7 outstandings and get the results in that school? So it is a bit more complicated than that. But at a time when the system should have been pulling together, cooperating and working together, what you got was people going off into their own corners, academies stopping doing the common safeguarding frameworks. This is the next issue that will come out, which is the fragmentation of safeguarding that's come from the Academies programme. But now what we're finding in Bradford is through the partnership and other things, there is a recognition that that hasn't been helpful, but everybody does need to come together and work and collaborate together. And the example of that is the head teacher who's transformed the disaster, and I'm sorry for the kids who've been going there at King's, but it's being turned around. The situation was turned around there by a local authority mainstream school head teacher, Jane Tiller, going in there and turning it round. And they came to a local authority for advice and support. But we need expertise, we need ambition, and there is a clear recognition that we need to reach outside of this city for it. It is not about one model. We've had Catholic schools, Church of England schools, 3 schools, all go good or go bad. But one of the problems is that judgments are not consistent. And at the moment, I am battling a number of Ofsted inspection judgments that simply defy all the evidence available to us. If we are to have an Ofsted framework, it has to be a consistent one, and it has to have some fairness in it, because there are 1 or 2 inspections that have come around recently that have been led by inspectors whose approach to staff has been nothing short of tyrannical.
So the framework's fair, it's the teams, and that's what's important. Teams are not consistent.
Well, the question was if academies improve standards, why is Bradford still not raised up, going up the league tables despite more academies? I think that was the thrust of the question. There's two elements to it. I mean, the facts of the matter are, whether you believe them or not, but all the facts are there that actually academies, the performance of academies, have outperformed other schools across the country, yes they have.
Not true.
Well, can I just say, that it's sponsored academies that have been open for 4 years, right, the proportion of pupils that achieve good GCSEs, I've got the figures here, including maths and English, has increased by 5 percentage points since they opened. That compares with results in local authorities that went up by 0.5 percentage point in the same period. So the facts of the matter are there. And Ofsted themselves said, whether you like Ofsted or not, but Ofsted said that sponsor-led academies have had a positive and sustained impact on attainment in challenging areas. So I think that there is evidence that academies do work. I'm in favour of academies in principle, though, and I genuinely, if I'm honest, don't understand the NUT position here. And I'll tell you why, because we've just agreed earlier, I thought we agreed, we seem to agree anyway, but what we wanted to do was take education out of political control. Let's have less political interference in schools. Let's trust the teachers to get on with it and all the rest of it. So actually, it was the last Labour government that introduced academies, and fair play to them. I supported them in doing so. Surely the obvious thing to do if you want to have less political control over schools is to create academies and have more teacher control over the running of the schools. That's the whole point of academies, that you take more control away from political interference at a local authority level and give it to the schools and the teachers to run themselves. Now, that seems to me to be a good way of delivering what we all said we wanted earlier, which was to trust teachers to get on with the job rather than having political control. Political control is exercised by local authorities, so let's take away the political control from local authorities, give it to the schools. That's called academies, and I'm in favour of the principle of academies because I think that's consistent with what I believe in giving teachers more control over the running of the schools.
So we have a disagreement there with some panel members. Kevin, what do you have to say?
Well, the problem with Philip's points, the question of whether teachers have control in academies, the NET surveys its members regularly, and we find that teachers in academies tell us they have less autonomy, less control than in the local authority schools. Now that might be a puzzle to Philip, but it's what we get from our surveys. When we say we don't want politicians in charge, we don't mean that we want to replace that with the control of the market. In the 19th century in this country, schools were run by churches, charities and philanthropists. We don't want to go back to that. Local authority, democratic involvement of parents and teachers through those sorts of structures is important. And Philip is also completely wrong about the evidence. It is a set of lines that ministers trot out, and they are misleading. When they talk about sponsored academies, they talk about academies who were at the very bottom of the pile. There is a statistical phenomenon called regression to the mean. If you're at the bottom, you've got nowhere to go except up. And so if you compare sponsored academies with all schools, you find that they improve faster. If you compare sponsored academies with other schools that were similar to them when they became sponsored, they haven't done any better than those. The inquiry that David just talked about, the Education Select Committee gave evidence to it. Their report came out last week. It's chaired by a senior Conservative figure whose name is Graham Stewart, and I've got 3 quotes from that report. It's a cross-party body. Current evidence does not prove that academies raise standards overall or for disadvantaged children. We have sought but not found convincing evidence of the impact of academy status on attainment in primary schools. We agree with Ofsted that it's too early to draw conclusions on the quality of the education provided by free schools or their broader system impact. So across the piece, this joint committee of MPs looked for evidence and could not find it. Where I'd slightly differ with them is after 10 years or so of looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, we gave up. After 10 years of looking for evidence in academies, I think we should give up. The evidence isn't there. It isn't a sensible way to think of the education system, that you change the way these things are orientated and expect to get change from it. Now, that wasn't the whole of the question. It's about Bradford as well. And I am not a local person, and I do not know the depth of the situation in Bradford, but I will say a couple of things about it if I can. First of all, we've tried different things in Bradford. They tried to privatise your local authority. And after 10 years of privatising the local authority, the results in the school were worse than they were before they started. Then they tried the Academy programme, and that hasn't worked either. I want to say something, and I hope this doesn't upset teachers in the audience. It is outrageous that so many children in this country, not Bradford, don't do as well as they could. Children could do better. And teachers work with every child and encourage them to do their best. But it is also simply statistically true that poverty is the major factor. It's the major reason why children are held back. Much more important than the school that they go to, much more important even than the quality of the teachers that they have. So it's outrageous, but you can't solve it just in the school. Every teacher has to do their absolute best. But politicians, they poverty blame teachers, they poverty blame schools. They have to take responsibility for the poverty, for the inequality that children face. Every statistical sample says the more equal a society, the more equal the exam results. Actually, probably the real determinant in Finland is not that they don't have league tables and don't have Ofsted. That's probably not what leads to them having more equal results. They've also got one of the most equal societies amongst the advanced capitalist economies, and we have got one of the most unequal societies amongst the advanced capitalist economies. Us and the US, we've got less equality in our society, and our results are less equal than the other countries. So you've got to deal with that, and that's not to say that we shouldn't look for everything else that we can do. We know London Challenge worked in London, partly by stabilising the teaching force, and I know there's a big problem of turnover of teachers in Bradford. If you're being pushed around by politicians all the time, maybe you don't stay. We'd stabilised the teachers in London by paying them more. The London Waiting campaign that I was part of led to teachers in London being paid more. The London Challenge has led to an improvement, and it was based on respect for teachers, respect between schools. Unfortunately, the coalition government closed the London Challenge experiment in 2010. That was their first act, practically, was to close down the most successful school improvement thing that's ever been run in this country. Instead, they wanted to go down the academies. They still haven't found the evidence of them working. So I want to say something positive about Ralph Berry and the fact that he's been involved, along with Judith Blake, a politician that I know in Leeds, in setting up the Yorkshire Challenge, looking for ways of trying to emulate the London Challenge locally. Good luck with trying to make that work.